between two buildings, and I'm not quite sure what they originally designed it for, other than maybe like gathering a class to give a lecture. But then if you actually walked up to this top step, you'd be hitting your head on those lights that are lighting up the artwork, and you'd be way too close. So some of these are really just incredibly awkward spaces, fake plants, other sorts of odd things. Like this one here, this is just a little memorial to two instructors, professors that must have passed away or retired or something like that. And this is at University of Wisconsin-Madison, so in the winter, the snow there gets yay deep. And so someone dragged a bike rack down there, so their bikes don't get covered with snow. So it's like these weird appropriations of different spaces. And I like to leave these as anonymous. I kind of label them by what's actually in the photographs rather than the location. That way, just about anyone can look at them and go, well, gee, that reminds me of such and such space that I've interacted with in some way. But usually they're totally wrong, because some of these are all over the Midwest, but they look so much like the buildings that we're all used to seeing, at least on university campuses and that sort of. That's about all. You guys have any questions?
I think it's interesting how like theatrical they all seem. And I was wondering if you could, I think maybe it has something to do with the perspective,
yes.
Or the lighting.
Yes, so I photograph with a view camera, which allows you to correct the perspective, and I like to make things very symmetrical. I had a background in architecture before I really kind of found photography, and so I used to always draw things to be very symmetrical and very correct, like perspective-wise. So I really am kind of finding these things and looking to kind of make them, and a lot of them feel very similar, like the angles in probably these three in particular. So it gets a little repetitive, but it kind of emphasizes the similarities and also the differences. And I really look for spaces that have the most spectacular lighting, like this strange mammoth behind you guys over there. Believe it or not, that thing's on a rotating platform. So it's never actually rotating at night, but if you're there in the day, they'll just kind of have a class in some sort of anthropology museum, and the whole thing will just kind of be slowly rotating. And the other side of it has all the ribs and guts kind of showing. But yeah, they're very bizarre. Very, very odd sort of stuff.
Yeah, they also seem to be like waiting for something.
Yes, it's kind of like a movie set, and the action has just happened and the actors walked off the scene. Other questions?
I'm particularly interested in the center one there with the wide wall and the flower and the green floor.
Yes.
Why can you tell me about that one?
Well, that one is, actually, many of these spaces are no longer there. That one is a lobby to an auditorium. And the wooden thing at the top must be 12 to 15 feet wide. Maybe not quite. Definitely about 12 feet wide. And it obviously wasn't there originally. I think it was taken out of some sort of church. And they just said, well, we can make this space a little nicer if we just hang this thing up there. We throw down a couple fake flower pots and some chairs. But what's interesting is when I was there and photographed it, there were plans like up on the wall for the addition they were putting on this building, and they were knocking out that entire wall to put on a big, beautiful addition for some sort of like cafe and a bigger lobby and that sort of thing for the entrance. But yeah, it's just not cinder block, a cement poured wall that they've covered with what looked like just canvas. It shows every little imperfection in the wall. But yeah, it reminds me of a doctor's kind of waiting room, but it's like a lobby to a.
That was exactly what it gave me the first impression of. But then, the more I saw the white flowers, I kept thinking more of a funeral home.
Yeah.
Rather than a doctor's waiting room.
And it's very depressing, so it would work as a funeral home.
Yes.
But yeah, so many of them are just these very strange, awkward spaces. And I think they used that as a gallery at one time because there were a lot of nails at relatively head level. So it was really dark and sad.
Have you thought about going back to these spaces like in 5 or 10 years?
I have. I actually would love to go back to that one and see what it's like now. And I think there's a 4 or 5 others that I think are different now than they were. I mean, obviously something like this, it's been erased. This building over here, which is also the same as this one here. That's what I was looking for. The whole exterior of this building's been completely redone. It's this beautiful silver and white. It's still the same sort of like proportions, but they just put a new facade on the outside so that it's not all rusted. So some of them are just very. I actually am really amused by how people change these spaces because part of what they're doing here is responding to this depressing or sort of not a beautiful garden arts and craft like we have here. So a lot of these are just how people respond to them, and some of the ways they respond is by, well, let's just rip it out and do something else with it. Another interesting detail about that image there was the back side of it was a big open cement space, and students would play racquetball off that big cement wall. So as I was in there, you just hear this little pong, pong, pong off the wall. Other questions?
It's funny to me that Elena's work seems to be like about the utter domination of nature, and those whole cityscapes are basically just concrete paved over what used to be trees and then what were farmlands. And your work is also sort of these dominant spaces, especially that one. In universities, though, so those are supposed to be spaces of kind of affluent liberalism and kind of open-mindedness. And one of the ways that they show it are these plant accents, and they bring nature back in to show that they especially at the Lexington side of this ivy going up. They're like, oh yeah, we've got this natural. It's all self-effect.
Give it a couple of years, and it'll be these really nice ivy all the way up the whole building, ivy sort of looking structure. It's just cinder block. It's there's not much for the ivy to grab onto, I guess. But
it's funny the different uses of it. Even when they're embracing nature, humans are really just using it to further some other ideological need, whether that's to exhibit the university's ethos or whether it's to have this car culture that's just a bunch of big box stores and how to expedite that. Or even if it's like, here's my influence and we can all sit around and talk in like a garden. And it's interesting that humans are able to do that. And they kind of unrelentingly do it when they're around.
Constantly manipulating nature in some way.
Yes.
On the flip side of that, I love that what you're showing is that yes, there's this geometry that's been set, and it does reflect the ideology of whoever is dominant and whoever built the school at the time. But then you just have this evidence of people kind of coming up against that and just ever so slightly changing it.
Just tweaking the architect's original
somewhat
idea.
subversive, but kind of in a very gentle way, and I really love that.
Or like the nature breaking back through the cement.
Right.
Yeah.